Thursday. Welcome to Bold Leaders in Learning. I'm Brandon Bustede, and as of yesterday, have a bit of a new title in my role at Kaplan. I was named Chief Partnership Officer for all of our university and employer partnerships, and will continue to serve as our Global Head of Learn Work Innovation. So welcome today. I'm delighted to have somebody who I consider a close friend. And on the subject of mentors and superpowers, someone who I look to as a mentor in many respects and whose superpowers I think you will all start to see very quickly. So let me welcome Sanyin Siang. She is, among other things, leading the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at Duke University. She was also named this year by Thinkers 50 as the world's top leadership coach. She does coaching with many Fortune 500 CEOs, top generals in the military, and is just a very special person to get wisdom from. So first of all, Sanyin, thanks for joining us on Bold Leaders. And I would love to just have you add a little bit more about yourself for our audience. By the way, I'll say, for those of you on LinkedIn, you probably know Sanyin already. She has over 1 million followers on LinkedIn. So this is one of the influencers. Thanks for being part of this. Great to see you.
Oh, Brandon, thank you so much for inviting me onto Kaplan's Bold Leaders. And congratulations on your new role. I mean, when I think about your superpowers, building partnerships and innovation, those are two of the many that you have. So in adding a little, thank you for that generous introduction. And adding a little bit of color, I would say my personal mission in life, it's to enable greatness in others. And that shows up as a mom. So I'm a mom to 3, ages 8, 10, and 11. They change ages on you. So sometimes I have to pause and think about that. As an educator, as a coach, author, and I love mentoring because I believe we are the product of the investment our mentors have made in us. So we have that responsibility to continue forward and continue to invest in our next generation. So excited to dive in.
That's a great way to start talking about mentors, and I think about them as super mentors as well, right? There's people who, take the time to mentor a number of individuals, and then there's ones that I put in this category of super mentors. And you and I know one of these in common. One of my mentors, who has been a mentor of mine since I was an undergrad, is Joel Fleischman, who's at Duke University, of course. And I'll start with data from one of the well-known studies that I led when I was at Gallup, which was the Gallup Purdue Index. And many of you are familiar with some of these insights, but in that study, right, it was a study, largest representative study of college graduates in US history. And it looked at all kinds of factors of the kinds of experiences they had or didn't have during college linked to their long-term well-being and workplace engagement. And of all the things that are part of the college experience, right? The one that matters the most to your long-term success is whether or not you strongly agree that during college you had a mentor who encouraged your goals and dreams. So it's a very strongly worded statement, but and for the people who had it, like they know instantly, right? When they see that question in a survey, it's like boom, and the first thing that happens is that person's name immediately is in their head. And if you were lucky enough to have more than one, a couple of people come to mind, right? So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that my fun story about this was that Thomas Friedman, the famous New York Times columnist, wrote a column about the research in this study when it came out, and it was entitled "It Takes a Mentor." And so I read Thomas Friedman books all the time, so I was like, oh my gosh, Thomas Friedman wrote a column about this study that I was involved in. Anyway, that morning it was like 6:20 a.m. when I saw the article, and the first email I got in my inbox was from Joel Fleischman, my literal mentor, who said, Brandon, I saw the article, amazing, keep up the great work. So Sanyin, I know you've had a lot of powerful mentors in your life. You have been a mentor to many. I call you a super mentor. Step back for a little bit and tell me about, first of all, why you describe this as your life's mission. Obviously, there was something about how you were supported in becoming the person you are today that makes you feel that way. And I would love you to just tell us about how you think about mentoring in terms of the real act of it.
So it's not a surprise that should be the finding of the Gallup Purdue study, right? Because ultimately, when we think about creating that foundation for ourselves and for each other, it's about mattering. So when someone takes the time to mentor you, I mean, we mentor us, we feel seen, we felt heard, and we feel like we matter. And ultimately, when we matter, that's understanding that we have something to contribute to the world, right? So that's the effect of mentoring. Now, mentors, one of the things in talking with people, sometimes people are surprised that they can be a mentor because they
Right.
think a mentor has to know all the answers. But at the end of the day, the first thing a mentor, anyone can be a mentor. You don't have to have the answers, but you know you have perspectives that you can share. But the first thing you have to do is just care
Right.
about the other person. So this idea of, I think super mentors, they help us believe in ourselves during times when we don't believe in ourselves. And they remind us of the dreams and aspirations that we have and share with us the perspectives, not necessarily the, step A, B, C, D, or E, because everyone is on a different path, but they help us see what's special about us that can enable the actualization of those dreams.
So you used a word care, right? And it turns out that's a really powerful word connected to this research as well, because in qualitative follow-up research, right, where Gallup spent time interviewing people who said they had a mentor who encouraged their goals and dreams, right, or another question that was related, professor who cared about me as a person. We would ask questions, open-ended questions like, okay, well, what was it that made you feel that way, right? Or what did that mentor do? And the most common word, if you were to put this on a word cloud, right, of the most common word that people just respond with, it's they cared, right? And then closely linked to care, they would say things. It would start with, well, they knew my name. And then they would expand and talk about other things. But it was amazing to think that, like, to your point, the bar actually starts relatively low. Like you care to know somebody's name and remember their name and refer to them by their name. And, I mean, like, that's one of the first basic steps to showing somebody you care. So I try to encourage faculty members and fellow students and others that, like, you can take a step in the right direction simply by showing you care, by knowing somebody's name, asking them, for example, what their goals and aspirations are. That's a good one. Like, how can I be a mentor who encourages your goals and dreams if I never ask you what you want to accomplish, right? So now, if I know that, then there's a whole bunch of things that I can start to do to encourage it, to help guide you in that direction, to challenge your thoughts on how to get there. So how, I mean, tell me about, the act of mentoring in terms of how you do it, right? This links into our conversation about superpowers, because I know one of the things you really try to focus on is understanding people's special talents, right? And how to help them thrive through that. So tell me a little bit about mentoring in the context of encouraging, identifying, and growing superpowers.
Yeah. And so, but I want to linger a little bit on this idea of care, right? There's
Yeah.
a famous quote that is, I can take as universal truth. They won't care what you know until they know that you care. And I've
Yeah.
General Bob Brown, who's one of the most beloved four-star generals in our US military. He's now retired. He was the one who shared this quote with me. And that's so true, because when you think about it, the mentoring is an act of leadership. And the linchpin of leadership is trust. And when you care, when people feel like they're being seen and they're being heard and that their ideas matter, that's how you start building trust, right? So now let's dive into the act of mentoring. I think it starts with exactly the things that you started talking about. Know their name, seeing them, looking at simple things like Coach K. I learned so much from Coach Mike Krzyzewski, who was one of the legendary basketball coaches. I know I always say, look at them in the eye, look at each other in the eye, right? And that idea of seeing, there's something about being seen. And then two, it's instead of jumping in and trying to give answers, start off with questions. Because guess what? When you ask questions and you ask open-ended questions without expectation of a certain type of answer and just letting them lead the conversation that way, I think there's something powerful in that, because one, you're going to discover something about them that you didn't know before. And two, more often than not, I learn more from my students probably than they learn from me. Because in asking questions and seeing their perspectives,
Yeah.
they started sharing insights, right? I'm listening for several things. I'm listening for information that they're sharing. I'm listening for their motivations and drivers.
Hmm.
I'm also listening for what what question is it that they're thinking, that they're answering when they give the answer. And sometimes it's different than the questions that we ask. And
Right.
then the fourth, I think it's really important. This is where mentoring, we think about it as a giving, but there's so much on the receiving too, is I'm also listening for, are the assumptions I have in my head the right ones, or do they need to shift? Right. So one,
Yeah.
just a little story. A few months ago, we were looking. I had a team of students for the center, and we were looking at how do we get content that is really good out more among the student body. And I said, all right, so this is a 500-word written piece, and how do we get that out? And I just paused because of the look on their face. And then I asked, wait, is 500 words too long to read? And they sort of nodded. And that was critical because then that shifted how we look at the modality of the written text versus maybe we should play out with audio, maybe we should play out with video, maybe we should do like just pictorial. But just that opened up a whole set of innovations for us to think about. So I think start by asking questions and then following up and having a sense of curiosity about them.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's one of your superpowers is asking really good questions that get somebody to think deeply and react deeply. But one of the things that is also definitely one of your superpowers is very intentional listening. And I want to reflect on that a little bit, right? Because we live in a day and age where most of us are encouraged to amplify our own voices, right? Social media is about amplifying that voice, and the louder the better and the more visibility, and it's not necessarily listening. If you're thoughtful about it, it can be an incredible listening post. And my dog is obviously very anxious to be part of the conversation too, so with apologies there. But so I wonder how well we do with this, because I don't know that school, for example, or college is training us to ask really good questions and to be very deep intentional listeners. I don't know that managers and companies are being, I mean, enlightened ones I think are down that path, but like, are you worried about the ecosystem and the environment we're in relative to doing this questioning and listening that you're talking about? How do we get there?
I think one is through more practice, right? And through more awareness of it. So, one of the key insights many years ago, because I was worried, like we're in a world where it is about self promotion, and that's less who you or I are. And I like asking questions. And then a friend had an insight. He's like, you know, you can learn more about a person by the questions that they ask than the answers that they give. I thought, okay, so what if we put that perspective out there to all the listeners today? When you ask more questions, the question, how you frame the question, what question you ask can actually tell people more about what you care about, what's your motivation, sometimes than the answers that we give. Imagine doing that for job interviews too, right? Encouraging people to, all right, what questions there, the interviewer is supposed to ask the question. But what if we ask the job candidates, ask us questions. Let's see what's in your mind. But
Right.
I want to thank you, Brandon, about highlighting my two superpowers that you saw, because one of the reasons why I went down the superpowers work is because I don't know what my superpowers are. And that's one of the insights, is our biggest blind spot is what's our superpowers. Because when I look at you, what's extraordinary about you to the rest of us? like your ability to create, like to frame up ideas and be so prolific. We're just talking about that for your Forbes pieces, and they're so thought provoking, and your ability to connect the dots with research and then punch out these insights, and then connecting that, also connecting people. That's extraordinary, but it's your everyday normal. And when it's your everyday normal, you tend to discount it and think everyone else
Right.
has it too. And
Yeah.
so I think we're so dependent on other people for helping us discover our superpowers. And that's one thing that mentors do. But then
Right.
we have a responsibility for rushing to tell people what their superpowers are, because we're in a world where we think we have to rush to tell them their deficiencies because that's how we help them. We can
Right.
also help people by rushing to talk about what is it that's inimitable, instinctive, and innate uh, specialness about them.
Yeah, and that, that harkens back obviously to a lot of work that I was familiar with in my days at Gallup, right, around strengths based, research, which is a different form of saying superpowers, right? But there were a lot of key insights that came from that. One, you do need the help of others, right, to help you understand those and appreciate those and to be supported in those. And then some of the other insights were that, top leaders, for example, in organizations, a lot of people will think about the idea that, well, they're very well rounded, or we should strive to be well rounded. And it's a little different concept, but like in a lot of studies, it wasn't that the individual leader was so well rounded, it was their teams were,
Yes.
because they all had certain superpowers that became complementary. And I think you had an interesting perspective on it, right? Like on one hand, as a leader, you could try to design a team that has different superpowers. Now, a basketball example might be good, right? You need your 3-point shooter, you need a great defender, you need a great passer, right? But like obviously, if you had all that in one player, they'd be LeBron James or whoever, right? But like when you think about building teams, do you think it happens? Can somebody set out to intentionally design a well-rounded superpower team, or do you think it's much more of an organic, accidental, like tell me how you think that's happening right now?
It's both. And by the way that we are talking about, traditional organizations have thought about the well-rounded leader. So let's take uh, Superman and Aquaman. That's like saying to Superman, wow, great job flying, but really you should take swimming lessons. And Aquaman, you're great in the seas, but hey, look over at Superman. Can't you take some flying lessons? And we have a tendency to take the superpowers and make it the common denominator for everyone rather than recognizing that person, what that person has is special. And I think why that matters, this idea of the collective team, is because in today's world, when it's so complex and we're facing such an exponential rate of change, it's no longer the core unit of the organization is no longer the individual. And yet our systems are still looking at individual productivity, right? The core unit is really the team and the interdependencies on the team. And so to your question of, can we design a team? Yes, but we have to look at a wider range of what adds value. So one, Coach K. Let's take a look at Shane Battier. Let's talk about Dookies, right? Shane's superpower is his emotional connectivity. So there's a great piece uh, where it's talking about the no stats all star. Shane's superpower is his individual stats may not be may not be as brilliant as some of the top basketball players, but when you look at when he's on the court, the entire team just does so much better. That's a superpower, right? And Coach K is brilliant at seeing beyond the functional superpowers to also the emotional superpowers. So yes, we can design a team, but we have to take into consideration not just the functional, or just the 3-point in the basketballers, the 3-pointers, or the I'm letting my lack of basketball knowledge really show here. Okay, but you know what I mean. We also have to have a wider range. And then Sue Gordon shared a quote with me, or she shared an insight with me. Sue is one of the recently retired as one of the highest ranking leaders in our national intelligence community. She said, you have to believe you're enough. You are enough, and you have to believe that it's so. And so when you look as a leader or as a mentor, when you're looking at your mentee, don't make them into who you want them to be,
Yeah.
but recognize they're enough. And how do you, and same thing with parenting too, right? I mean, we were just talking about your kids, Brendan, and how they have different superpowers. And sometimes as parents, we can fall into the trap of trying to make them into who we want them to be rather than who they can be. So,
Yeah, it's a lot of, I mean, these insights are transferable to so many parts, right? Like parenting and how to raise kids, and obviously in the workplace and a basketball team. And you're right, I think about a Phil Jackson, right? Who, has more NBA titles than any coach. And most people would credit for him for being the Zen master of all the egos of the players that were parts of the teams. And like, so he was very much into the emotional, and would start, practices with yoga and meditation and stuff that the players were probably like, this guy's crazy. But, he was making sure they were attuned to that kind of emotional connectivity. And so I think these are important points, especially during the year that we have all been surviving through, which, a global pandemic, massive job loss, and unbelievable racial and equity and injustice. And it's just been probably one of the toughest years that any of us have ever experienced, right? So especially in the context of this last year, right, for leaders to be more in touch with emotion, not just their own, but of the people they're leading. And I would love you to just touch on a couple of these things. I know you spent a lot of time coaching leaders in the context of this pandemic, and things like vulnerability and actually taking time for themselves, putting on their own mask before they put on, the oxygen mask of others. Can you just tell us a little bit about some of the best advice you've been giving leaders in the context of this incredibly challenging leadership climate?
so one is there's no work life anymore. It's just life. Hi, you've just welcomed me into your home. You're in my home. I heard your puppy dog. You probably heard my kids in the background. It's life, right? And
Yeah.
so there's a different expectation now, I think, of our employees, that they expect our leaders to be even more human. And so things that leaders would traditionally have done. So during the pandemic, there was a lot of loss, right? And we can talk about the tangible loss of life, relatives, family members. And it's to CEOs to say, you know what? That person in your company that may be frontline person, pick up the phone and talk and call them. You don't have to know what to say, but the fact that you called and said you're thinking of them, that means a lot, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to what we were talking about with seeing and hearing, and seeing and mattering. And I think this idea of just being able to create a battle rhythm
Yeah.
in the middle of chaos, that battle rhythm is so important. And part of that battle rhythm is reflective time. And this is something I learned from Marty Dempsey. When Marty Dempsey, retired four-star general, 18th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when he became chair of the Joint Chiefs, he knew his time was going to be, his schedule wouldn't be his own anymore. And he was super intentional about scheduling in time
Yeah.
for just reflection. And then the third piece of advice is we are more resilient through community, right? Through community, through friendships. And by the way, one thing we don't usually hear about when it comes to teams, we still think about teams at work as being functional. Friendships,
Yeah.
that care, it goes back to that care, right? This is
Yeah.
all connected. And and that's why I'm like so excited also about what we've been working on this past year, Brandon. I would love, can you share a little bit more about that? Because that is about fostering friendships,
Yes.
resilience, and learning from one another.
Yeah, I know that's where I wanted to finish. One of the things that Sanyin and I have been collaborating on, and this happened on a whim, basically, right after the pandemic began. She and I connected and said, leaders are going through a really tough time, leaders of all kinds, and I looked at it through the lens of university presidents. I spent a lot of time with college and university presidents, and they have perhaps one of the most difficult leadership jobs because they have so many different constituencies, stakeholders. I mean, the complexities of some of these institutions are among the most complex in the world, right? And then there's this concept of shared governance and all these other things that are really challenging for them. Their strengths and weaknesses of the model of higher ed. But so, we were thinking about the fact that, college presidents in particular have pretty lonely jobs, right? I mean, like they rarely get to spend time with other college presidents. They rarely get to carve out time for thoughtfulness and reflection. And so we gathered up 6 college presidents who I've known and worked with, and Sanyin and I created a monthly forum where we connect on Zoom, and it's just an opportunity for them to talk in a very confidential format with one another about some of the challenges they're having, to let their hair down and just be right and to sit on some thoughts. And so Sanyin has been creating some great prompts and dialogues for this, and each one of them, and I know if they were here they would say it. They have said it's one of the single most valuable things that they've had this year is this moment. We typically did the calls late on a Friday afternoon, and they were all like, we're exhausted, but like we can't wait to get to our Friday president forum. So clearly creating that small community, right? The intimacy of that, it has become a friendship, even though we've never met together physically in person. We know about their families and about a best friend that they had who died, and I mean it's all part of it. But talk about that it's been a special experience for both of us to be a part of, and because of it, we're going to be scaling it and creating more of these president forums in the months to come. So more on that. But Sanyin, tell us a little about your view of that time and moment and leadership opportunity.
Yeah, and this past year, being a part of that, I felt like even though we have not met in person, with all these 6 presidents, I feel like they reveal themselves. Like we know them really well, right? Like we can pick up the phone and call them, and that's what we want to foster is the sense of, if that vulnerability, so that we can pick up the phone and be able to say, I'm wrestling with this. Are you wrestling with this too? Let's put our solutions together. And maybe the solution is always in the network, right? And two, I've discovered university presidents are really interesting people. Brandon, we don't usually, in the news or in working with them, we see them as university presidents, but they are human beings and they are lovely. And and through that process, I've also learned, discovered a little bit more about myself too. So it's been great. I'm so excited that we're scaling it, because I think that can really make a positive. When you think about universities and the impact that they have on your students, if we can help the leaders lead more fulfilling and be able to problem solve with one another, isn't that will cascade down and have a larger impact on all the students and the staff and the faculty throughout the universities that they lead.
That's for sure. They're in incredibly high impact roles, and also are among the leaders who have been exhausted most during this pandemic. I mean, I'd put them up there with hospital leaders and those who have been managing teams on the front lines in various ways. But the university presidents have been through a lot this year, so it's been great to try to contribute a new model there. And to your point, excitement about expanding this and making it available to more. So anyway, what we may want to do is several months from now do a Bold Leaders in Learning with some of our president friends from the forum, and maybe distill some of the big leadership discussions and insights that we've had, at least the ones that we're willing to share.
That's great.
Yeah.
Brandon, thank you for your vision in creating that forum. You are someone who always has an eye on taking your superpowers and your gifts and really stewarding them by making the biggest possible difference in the world. I'm so honored to know you and call you a close friend.
Well, I feel the same. So thank you for lending your superpowers to it, and collectively here we'll do the I don't know what would be the the collective. I don't know that we're Superman and Aquaman, but we got to come up with whatever our duo is. So
we are a great team. Let's just we're a great team.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. For those of you who aren't already following Sanyin on LinkedIn, please do. She shares wisdom literally every day, and I hope you become part of her community. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next Thursday for another great discussion.
Great. Thank you, Brandon.